Welcome to Dedicated. I'm your host, Doug Brunt. Today, we're with Wendy Walker. Wendy is the best-selling author of psychological suspense novels, including her breakout 2016 novel, All Is Not Forgotten. And I discovered Wendy's work through the best way, through a good friend, Sarah Clementi, who came over and was raving about this book she was listening to on Audible. And from there, I ran out, got All Is Not Forgotten, and that has led to this conversation here today with Wendy. Welcome.
Thank you so much. That's a great story. I love it.
It's like, that's how it ought to be. Word of mouth, a great book gets around slowly but surely.
Exactly how it should be.
Yeah. And you have ordered up some Greyhounds for us.
Yes,
so
I
I'll get going on that. We are doing a rare studio show outside of the Sirius XM studio. So slightly different background today as I fix these up.
That's great. You got a heavy pour there.
Yeah, well, it's been a long day.
Yes. I think everybody needs a cocktail after Thanksgiving weekend with the family. Right. There are always stories to tell.
All right. We'll put
Here we go. So we've got vodka and grapefruit. I love it.
All right. I'll mix these around a little bit in the
in
the shaker.
Fantastic.
Is it for the listening only audience? This is a good sound effect.
I've become very aware of sound now that I write for Audible. Mm-hmm. So sounds like that, it's perfect. So, and
cheers.
Thanks for having me.
I like the vodka. It feels like you're doing something maybe a little healthy, or at least not terrible. There's something redeeming in there.
Yeah.
All right. So let's start with your background, because your background prior to coming to writing is fascinating. What I discovered is that you are exceptional at everything you've ever put your mind to, including competitive figure skating as a kid.
Yes. I don't know why I was, competitive is not the right word. I would say more driven. So whatever was put in front of me, a task or a challenge, I would just do it. It wasn't about doing it better than someone else. It was just doing that thing.
Doing it well.
Like a dog with a bone. I mean, not to compare myself to a dog, but that's how I've always sort of felt. Like I get something in front of me and I feel like I have to do it and do it to the best of my ability. So I started skating. I think I was around 8 years old, and a friend took me with her to a public session. And once I got the hang of it, that was it. I was hooked. Mm-hmm. And I skated until I was about 16. And then I just stopped. I realized I wasn't going to make it any further. And I set my sights on becoming an investment banker even at 16. I was like, what's the next hard thing I can do?
I know. All of this will lead up to you breaking into writing in that same determined way. Really, it's almost like two phases of it, which I think the audience for the show, 100% of the audience for the show are avid readers. And I think many are also folks that know they have a book or two in them and are always interested in hearing how someone broke through. So we'll get to that. But before that, you did have other big time career. So you went to Brown undergrad, and then Goldman Sachs investment banking.
Yeah. And again, it was, when I started out in college thinking, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I studied economics and political science. And what was interesting about it is that when I was at Brown, because it has an open curriculum, I was able to pursue my goal, which was to study economics, and I had close to a math minor, do all the things I needed to do to get my job. Mm-hmm. But I had enough room in my schedule to pursue things that were interesting to me. And it was really there that I started to realize what was interesting to me outside of these goals that I had set for myself. So political science was one. And I spent an entire year at the London School of Economics, and I traveled extensively through Europe. And that was so eye-opening. I'd never been abroad. and I came back and really had a different view of things, a different view of myself and the world. It had opened up so much, but I still pursued my goals. So I went, by the time I got to Goldman Sachs,
So you were in London in your around 20, 21, 2, something like that?
No, I went to London as a junior in college. So I was there at my junior year abroad. I did the entire year.
So 19 or 20, something like that.
I was, I was probably 19 to 20. Yeah. I think I turned 20.
That's a great time to travel.
Yeah.
You're old enough to sort of get around, but it's the world just seems so big to you and exciting.
So exciting. And I actually went to the Soviet Union when it was still the Soviet Union. And I think the wall fell while I was there in London. And it was just, it was incredible to have just been, in the Soviet Union that then became the former Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So much fodder to work with for novels. So then you do a couple years at Goldman Sachs and then switch gears and go to Georgetown Law, which it's hard enough just getting into Georgetown Law, but then you go on and practice was it corporate litigation?
Corporate litigation.
That's where all the talented lawyers go, corporate litigation. That's not easy.
That's where all the lawyers go who need to pay off their law school debt. That's what that's about. And that's, by the time I got to law school, I had actually, my focus had really shifted. So it was almost like my passions and my interests were lagging behind, a little bit behind where I was in these achievements that I had set for myself. So by the time I got to Goldman, I was very interested in women's rights and women's issues, and of course I'd gotten that actually from being in London, but also being at Brown, and here I was in a very traditional environment, mergers and acquisitions in the late 80s, early 90s. It was a free for all, and I worked in the oil and gas sector. So it was it's hard to imagine in today's environment that the types of situations that I found myself in. So I really, at that point, decided I really wanted to go to law school.
In terms of the male-female situation in a boardroom?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, I was in a situation the first time I went to a meeting. It was me and the associate and the partner. And the three of us were in this meeting, and it was with the CEO of a very large media company. I think we were selling a media division of another company. And we all sat down. I was wearing my suit. We weren't allowed to wear pants to work. So I was wearing my skirt and my suit. And we started talking, and I had done, I think, the book for this analysis. And the CEO said, "Why aren't you taking notes?" And he's pointing to me, and I was sitting there. I had the board book and I had a pen, but I wasn't scribbling notes. He thought I was the secretary who was there to take down notes of the meeting. And
no, I'm actually running the meeting. I was
actually, I'm about to give the presentation on this whole book because I did the whole analysis. Things like that. But then, also the other stuff that you hear about, the strip clubs and the way that women were talked about in the oil
There's the subtle
industry.
stuff like little comments and misconceptions like that. But then have you been invited to a strip club, or how would that go down? So would they say, "Come with us," or would they say, "You stay home, we're going"?
Oh no, 100%. I would go. I would go. We were selling at one point a division of an oil and gas company, and I think we were in. It was either Dallas or Houston. I did deals in both, and we had just done a huge sell day, and there was a big dinner, and I remember this long table and all the cowboy hats, all the executives wearing cowboy hats, or many of them, and I was there with the team, and they were. Nobody ever did anything inappropriate in terms of, physical, anything like that. But there was a lot of interest in my dating life, know, and a pretty young girl like you, why aren't you dating anybody? And I'm like, because I'm here working 100 hours a week.
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
Corporate litigation is 100-hour week is commonplace.
It's crazy. Yeah. So then, and then they would all be going to the strip club after dinner, and I would be invited, but I never went. And at the time, I didn't think this is where the relationships are being formed, for the rest of my career. But I was thinking, okay, I can go back to, the mansion at Turtle Creek, which is a really nice hotel, and order a really expensive glass of scotch and watch a rom-com in my pajamas.
Mm-hmm.
So there I was, like, spending the rest of my night doing that, and the team would be at a strip club. Yeah.
Were you the lone woman on the team?
I was, yeah.
And I guess that was often the case. And was there ever a situation where there were 3 women and you would go off and do something different from the strip club?
No, it was always, it was just me. I was me, and the associate I always worked with was a man, and the partner was a man on those deals, And that was most of my tenure at Goldman. It was only 2 years, so it's, and then I went to law school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's no question that late night activity is relationship forming and is part of getting ahead, really.
My gosh.
Like, it definitely holds you back to sort of have to peel out of those moments a little bit.
I had friends who would go. I did have friends who worked on other deals, and they would go, and they all had their stories of, they would just roll with it. It just wasn't my thing.
Is there, I'm dying to know name. I know you can't say the names. Must have been like the Enron CEO at some point or something, but we won't.
I will take them to my grave because that's
or you'll just make them a character in one of your books.
Yes. And names will be changed for sure.
Barely, a little change.
We had some big clients who became big movers and shakers in different areas of the world. So, but yeah.
So then another big change comes along. So you've gotten investment banking, you've got corporate litigation, and then motherhood comes along.
Yeah. I mean, it's such an interesting chapter in my life that as we're going through these changes, I don't know that we ever really stop and think about how we'll feel about this 10 years from now, whatever. It just feels right in the moment. At least that's how it was. It always sort of happened with me. And I remember I was at law school. I'd started dating my future husband, and
he was also a law student?
No, he was in New York. He was at business school. And so we had a long distance relationship we met after my first summer. I was actually really interested in criminal law. So I was doing an internship at the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of Manhattan, of New York, in Brooklyn. And some big mafia trials going on. It was really exciting.
This is during the Giuliani days, I guess?
Yes, it was. Yeah, it was. And very exciting times to be there. And I met my future husband there. And then we were long distance for a year. Mm-hmm. And then I actually finished up my final semester at Columbia so I could be full-time in New York. And I really, by then I was sort of done with all of this, achieving. I don't know how else to describe it. Mm-hmm. And it was like Forrest Gump who just stops running. That's how I see myself. And a lot of it was my husband, who was very, he was very influential in that he really knew what he wanted and sort of saw the melding of career and family. And something about it, I was just ready. I was ready to stop running and sort of nest and make a family. And that's what I did. I stopped. We moved out to Connecticut, where both of us were from, and something I swore I would never do. I mean, I was a feminist coming out of Brown, and I saw my family unit as so the opposite of what I ever wanted to be. My mom was a traditional housewife. My dad worked on Wall Street. He came home, he sat down, where's dinner? My mom taking care of 5 kids, never a nanny, never any help. She cleaned the house herself, living in New Canaan. Just so, and you would madden me, right, to see this. I'd be like, Mom, tell him to find the clicker himself. Tell him to get off his butt and get his own cup of tea, And she's like, it's okay. He had a hard day at work. Yeah.
My dad could never find anything.
Yeah.
And I'd say it's like right here, Dad. Did you look in any drawers?
Yeah.
He wasn't used to ever, just a thing. I mean, my dad would be 98 if he were alive today. It's just, I don't know.
So that was, it's very when I look back on how I ended up getting married in New Canaan, having my first house in New Canaan, and 3 years later, having the first of 3 children and stopping my law practice 100%, and just being a full-time mom.
Yeah.
But that's when I started
During all these years of investment banking, lawyering, mothering, were you an avid reader? Did you have in the back of your mind that one day I would love to be a writer? Like where was writing in the background during all these years?
Nowhere. It was nowhere.
Were you reading a lot? As a lawyer, there's no way you had time to read fiction.
I had never read fiction. When I was in college, I read, because I was, gearing up to work in M&A. I read biographies of successful business men, usually. T. Boone Pickens, people, the old school,
which is a great name, by the way.
T. Boone Pickens.
Love that.
I remember reading that while I was waitressing in a bar during my summer between, I think, sophomore and junior year, and I'd be in the back reading the T. Boone Pickens. I can't remember the name of it, but his biography. That's the kind of stuff I read, and then I just read for school. Really, it really started, I think, when I was home with my first son, and I needed something to do and to think about. It was really bad. I was sitting on the floor. We've all sat on the floor with a child, I think many of us, and they're sitting there in a little baby boppy, and it's like, okay, the day, you have all these hours in the day to fill with this pre-verbal child who's trying to put, the blue ball in the blue hole and keeps putting it in the green hole, which is too big or small. And he's just trying again and again, doesn't understand. And all the parenting books tell you, don't help, just be encouraging, try again. And I'm sitting there like, I'm going to take his hand and move it. I need to be thinking about something else. This is not going to work for me. I just can't.
So how old were your 3 boys when you re-entered the workforce? Because you did family law when you first re-entered, right? Yeah.
So they were, I guess they were maybe 12 and under. So I was divorced at that point. I knew I needed to get my career going. All 3 were just in school. My youngest had just started preschool, and I gave the writing a couple more years, but I had published a couple of books by then, but I had not started making any money. And this is the thing, if there are any aspiring writers listening, that, there's being published, and then there's being published in a way that can really forge a career. And it's so important to know that difference. And I really didn't.
That's the part I found. I read a little bit of a prior interview you did that I think speaks to this. So you had, what I read, and correct me if this is not accurate, but you had 2 books that were not published, 2 that were published to sort of, you were published. So that's successful right there. Yes. But they weren't, breakout commercial successes. And then you sat down with your agent and said, I want to be, this goes back to ice skating and investment banking and lawyering.
Yes.
I want to be great at this. I want to succeed.
Yes.
What's selling? And I think this was sort of in the wake of Gone Girl and some other books in the market that had kind of broken out.
Yes. It's very much my personality, right? To be realistic and having had all of these experiences in my life, knowing that there are many dreams to be pursued and that I'm not defined by any one of them. And there are many things that I can love to do in this world. And I loved being a mother to my kids. I actually loved practicing family law for the most part. I loved my clients. I felt very passionate about my clients. So but I had kept writing on the side. So I had 2 books published. I'd actually written for Chicken Soup for the Soul. I've edited, I think 3 editions for them, trying to make a living as a writer and just seeing that it was really
doing
hard.
Family law and writing at the same time.
Yep. Then I was practicing family law and watching my writing and trying to do the writing on the side. Wrote a whole novel, and then my agent revised it with her for a year, and finally, I think it was the last conversation I had with her that, she said, I just don't know what to do with this. The market this is not fitting with the market. I don't know who to give this to sell. And I remember leaving that conversation, and I remember crying. I cried out of frustration. And I really just at that point wanted the universe to tell me if I should keep going, because I'd been writing at that point for close to 17 years, all in from the day I started trying to write a book. And I just wanted the universe to tell me what to do.
What do you think lit the fire? It takes a ton of work and a ton of perseverance to get over all the no's, all the rejections. What made you so determined to be a writer when you'd had all these other careers prior?
So at the time I started writing, I didn't know how hard it would be. I had absolutely no idea. And I think a lot of people are like that. They think, I just have to write the thing, right? The hardest part feels like writing those 350 pages or whatever it's going to be. And they do that. And once they start doing that, which is very hard, it's very hard to look at a blank page. It's very hard to structure whatever it is you're trying to write. And then you get to that point and you have a good product. And then you think, oh my gosh, like that, like I'm almost at the top of this mountain, because I've already done more than most people I've ever met who say they have a book in them. Then you go out into the world and you try to get an agent, and you try to, which is hard enough. Yeah. And then you have an agent, and then you try to sell it. They try to sell it. And then maybe you even get a publishing deal. And then you think, oh, well, now I've made it. And then you see it comes out, it doesn't sell.
Yeah.
You've gotten an advance of, under $20,000 or something, which a lot of people get really low advances. And you spend it all on marketing, a website, you write impassioned letters to every independent bookstore in the world, mass mailings, you do all of these things. And then the book sells, 3,000 copies, and they're all your friends and family from Facebook. And then your publisher gives you maybe one more chance, and then they cut you loose.
Maybe. It's very hard to get a deal.
Maybe.
It's almost easier to be a debut writer than to have, one or two that have not hit.
In fact, when I wrote All Is Not Forgotten, there was a lot of talk about whether I should change my name, because I'd had these two quote unquote failed books before that hadn't sold many copies.
And they're totally different genre.
They were just general fiction they were about suburbia. After spending enough time there, I was like, I have to write about all the things I see here and strive. Like I just have to write about it. So when I was wanting the universe to tell me what to do, to either keep writing or to keep going, I was about to hang a shingle with my own law practice. And I just needed to spend all of my time on one career instead of trying to, work on the side as a writer and work 2/3 time as a lawyer and be a mother and all of that. And so, yes, I decided I would create my own universe, my own set of rules. And after I had gone through the process of the universe I created, I would have my answer at the end. And so the universe I created was to get smart about the business. That I had enough tools to write. I knew how to write novels. So I was going to find out what would sell. What does every editor want to be put on his or her desk and is going to go and bid like crazy and, spend a ton of money on? And I asked my agent what that was. And that's when she told me, everybody wants the next Gone Girl. And I'd heard of it, but I didn't really know what it was. So I read Gone Girl. I read Girl on a Train. I deconstructed those books. I actually mapped out what it was about them that made them different from other suspense novels and thrillers. And I took an idea I had that I had been kicking around for years. I'd read an article I'd read in the New York Times that I thought this would be a great legal thriller, actually. And I took that idea and I put it into the formula of a psychological thriller. And then I wrote All Is Not Forgotten. I think all in, it was probably 10 weeks from the time I first started thinking about it to when it was done. And that was it. That was my universe I created. And I told myself, if I do all of these things and I still don't forge a career, then I am done. And I have friends now who say, come on, you would have kept writing, you know it. And I'm like, no, I really would not have.
Really? You can honestly still say that?
Would not have. Maybe years later, I don't know. But no, I was really going to be done at that point, and I was going to focus on my legal career. And then All Is Not Forgotten was like the universe just opened up, and we had all 5 houses bidding on it. Within a week, I had sold the movie rights with Reese Witherspoon attached, Warner Brothers, buying the option. We had, I don't know how many foreign deals, all in 23 by the time we were done, but preemptive offers from some of the bigger markets, Germany and England and UK. And
it's a great book. I loved it.
Deal.
And it clearly pulls from your family law background that you had great. I mean, the twists in it, the characters in it, it's such real, the discussions with a therapist. I'm like, it's hard to write a therapist scene and make it really work. It was great. Great stuff. I loved it. By the way, you're so much like my wife in some ways, because she, like you, was for a time a badass corporate litigator.
Yeah.
And I always say she's not a perfectionist, but she's an exceptionalist.
Yeah.
And anything she does super well. And she would have, if she had decided I'm going to write a psychological thriller, I think she would have, hearing how you did it, I think she would have done the same way. She would have deconstructed the best out there. She would have had her ideas. She would have persevered and done it exceptionally well. So it's fascinating to hear how you came at the market several different ways and then succeeded. Like it can be done. But there is nothing more disheartening than, some of those dropout steps are particularly bad. The bottom drawing a book that is just not going to get there, because you've written the 350 pages. You put your heart and soul in it. You realize no one's going to read it. It's not going to matter. Or, you get the publishing deal and very few people will read it. And it's also kind of not going to matter. And it actually hasn't set me up for future success at all. If anything, it's been a bad step forward. So it's there are pitfalls, not to be disheartening to the audience, but there are pitfalls along the way. But then there are ways to succeed.
Yeah, and it's a very unique business, and my advice to all aspiring writers is to learn the business, really understand the business side of things.
How did you find an agent?
So this was back. This is going to date me. This was back when there was still Kinko's, not just FedEx bought it, and then it was FedEx, Kinko's, and then sort of lost the Kinko's part. Kinko's, right? So you would go and make actual photocopies. So this was before people were sending things out in digital formats. So,
and I refer to Kinko's now to my kids in the way that my parents refer to like the Telegraph.
Yeah, or like Blockbuster. Like these things. Remember, we go to Blockbuster and get videos. So I remember being, I was pregnant with my 3rd child by then, and it was a legal thriller, my first novel, and I had written it and rewritten it with the help of a writing professor that I found through a friend who told me all the things I had done wrong. So I got a crash course in writing after I had written a novel. So also, if anyone's an aspiring writer, just learn some basic skills first, like take a class or whatever, because there are tools to writing a novel that are not obvious, no matter how much you study and read books, and no matter how many other careers you've had where you've written for that career, there's something very specific about writing a novel. So I'd written and rewritten that book for, I think, I don't know, maybe 5 years. And so I went to Kinko's and I had a list. I had a list of, I think 30 agents that I'd found in a book called Publishers Marketplace, which is also now online.
Yeah, exactly.
But back then it was a book, and it came out every year, and it would list the agents and what they wanted and I called each one to make sure, are you accepting new clients, and how do I submit?
God, you did it the old-fashioned way.
Oh my gosh, and I was amazing. There. I had piles. I had, 3 chapters and a 1-page synopsis. I had 50 pages and a 5-page synopsis. Like, everybody wanted a different combination. And so I had these piles with little gold clips. And then there's this thing called a SAS, a self-addressed stamped envelope, where they can mail back the rejection letter, because they always call you if they want you. And so putting that SAS into the folder was like taking a shovel and digging another scoop in your writing career grave.
Come right back to
exactly.
me. Oh my gosh, it's just stressing me out just hearing that a little bit. So not even a friend of a friend warm intro. You really just cold through the literary marketplace.
I did it cold, but the agent I ended up going with, who was did not stay my agent because she eventually retired. But it eventually got read because of a friend I had in foreign rights who knew someone in the foreign rights department.
Okay.
And so, yeah, it actually did get read because of that contact. And that is also huge. I mean, the slush pile it's very hard to get out of.
Yeah. Well, and the slush pile is bigger than ever because you don't have to mail it. You can email it now. So you can send it to 5,000 people with one click.
You don't have to go to Kinko's and stand there pregnant for 5 hours watching 5 machines go. And
so they're totally inundated. And the editor, and that's just to get an agent. Then you got to get some editor to read at a house. And there are fewer of those than ever before. And
absolutely.
So again, we're making this to be depressing for aspiring writers, but it can happen. It happens.
It can happen. Yeah.
One question before we get into your writing process. I'm dying to know about the 10 weeks thing on All Is Not Forgotten, things like that. But I read that you said James Patterson has a, quote, winning structural formula.
Yeah.
And wanted to ask you about that and what you mean.
Yeah. So I don't know if many people know his story, and I hope I'll get it right because I read this article about him years ago, but he was in marketing. That was his career. And he was writing on the side like many people do. And I think he had published a couple of books that didn't do well. And he looked at the marketing and it was so frustrated by it that along came a spider. I don't know which number book that was for him, but it wasn't his first published novel. And the story goes that he sort of took over the marketing effort for that and paid for it himself. Mm-hmm. And he knew from his experience, place a full page ad in these newspapers on Sunday, different markets, in the Washington Post, the New York Times, whatever it was. He kind of knew what worked at the time to launch a book based on his marketing expertise. And that book became, as we all know, a huge bestseller. And from that point on, he directed his own marketing. And he just is very brilliant at that. But he also kind of knew, this is a product. My book is a product. Right. This is what people want from me. And so over the years, his Alex Cross series, people say formulaic, like it's a bad thing. But for people who want commercial fiction, that's what they want. They want, if you're watching a romantic comedy, you want them to get together at the end. Mm-hmm. You want there to be a moment where they may not get together. You need the funny friend that each of them has that gives them advice. There are things that you want when you go to, it's I describe it almost like rides at an amusement park. If you buy a ticket to the roller coaster, that's what you want. You want the roller coaster. You want the drop. You want, leave your stomach, 100 feet in the air. But if you buy a ticket to the Gravitron, you want to be spun at 100 miles an hour in a circle. And if you buy a ticket to the roller coaster and you get on the Gravitron, you are not going to be happy. Mm-hmm. So his view of it was really to have a structure for the story that was recognizable to the readers who were buying the book for that reason. And that's why they always come back. Mm-hmm. And now he has dozens of writers who write under his brand.
Yeah.
And he supervises them so that there's quality. It's almost like McDonald's franchise.
Sort of built out the structure beyond the...
Yeah, when you get McDonald's french fries, they are the same no matter where you buy them.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with the James Patterson book. No matter what book you buy, what flavor the author has brought to it, who's writing under his brand, it's going to have the same level of quality and the same type of structure as all of his books.
In terms of formula, I've read, there are lots of people who take these screenwriting classes.
Yes.
And it gets down to the formula. By 17 minutes in, X needs to happen. And halfway through the film, Y needs to happen. And there really is a structure to every, and then when you watch movies again, you can see, oh my gosh, I can see they did it just how that way. It's only subliminally coming in.
Yeah.
But that is true of Patterson. And I think his structure extends even to the writing itself.
Yeah.
You want a page turn and you're turning pages because it's so good. Well, you're also turning pages because there's 50 words on a page. The chapters are really short. And
exactly.
that sort of thing. But it works.
It works.
I have loved some of his early books. He actually came on the show because he's done so many different things too. He's written a couple he co-writes a lot of books with other people in different subjects that are fiction and nonfiction. And he's turned it into a real publishing empire.
Yeah, he's almost his own imprint. Although, it's just really his brand, right? If his name is on a book, it's going to have a certain quality to it. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about your process.
Yes.
So you referenced this already, and I had read this separately, but you wrote this book, All Is Not Forgotten, which again, you've written, 10 since here probably, but this was from 2016. You wrote this in 10 weeks.
Yeah.
So in terms of your process, describe that 10-week period.
And I just finished a new novel for Audible, turned in a draft. I'm sure it will need revisions, but and that all in was probably 8 weeks. So it's not always that fast, but this book, I knew I had to get it done because my kids were going to be out of school for the summer. Anybody who has kids in school, I have 3 sons. So I think this was in March, and I had a very large arbitration going on at work. So I knew I had to get through that. So I was thinking about the plot while I was working, not while I was working, when I was driving home and, other times during the day. I was very focused on the arbitration. But in my free time, I was thinking about the plot and thinking about how to structure it and making some notes. And then once spring break was over and the arbitration was over, I had from that point until like the end of May. And that was it. So it was no choice. I knew if I didn't get it done by then that I wouldn't be able to sell it that summer. And then publishing shuts down in August. So I was like, oh my God, if I can't sell it early in the summer, like it's going to be another 6 months delay. So, and my process is really, I outline. A lot of authors don't outline. That doesn't mean I don't deviate and I don't change, but I get the bones of the story down. This book was so complicated.
It was very complicated.
Yeah.
Great twist to it.
Thank you. So
you knew the ending. You had outlined it.
I had 3 endings that could have been the ending. I wrote the middle one, and then my agent had me change it to the lightest one. And so that's the ending that we sold it with, and it stuck. So I had a really dark ending. I had a medium dark ending, and I had like a little bit of a lighter ending. And I structured it so all of the endings would work with some tweaks. But I had these index cards, and they were color coded because this book has one narrator. It's a psychiatrist, and he is within his chapter. Each chapter, he's recalling things that were said to him by the people he's been seeing to help solve this crime. And it's not linear. So it's very stream of consciousness, right? The way he is discussing what happened. And then there's forward action, things that are happening. He is going through motions. I don't know how long the actual book takes place, but it's a pretty short time frame from when we start to when the book ends. But he is recounting, I think, a year and a half of interviewing all of these people, the young girl who was assaulted, her parents, the detective. And so I had these index cards, and they were color coded for each of those characters.
That's a great way to do it, to hold together your various timelines, because you do jump around, but it weaves all together. It holds. Like as the reader, you never get lost, really. But that's because you've organized.
I've organized it that way, yeah. And that I learned a lot writing that. I learned that skill. So the book I just wrote has 3 narrators. One is in the past, and the other 2 are both having some present action going on, but they're interacting with people from the past. And when they alternate, it has to go back to our character in the past, and she has to be in a moment that ties to it. And so for me, the outline is really important. Like, so I know in this chapter, this has to happen. Everything around it is then up for grabs. And however I envision it, I'm describing a room. I'm like, oh, look, I've gone down the road. I'm like, oh, shoot, now I have to go back. So there is a lot of in the moment, what they call pantsing, fly by the seat of your pants, that happens when I'm writing. But I know that I have to, whatever I write certain things have to happen in that chapter to tie it all together.
Yeah. You sort of got your scaffolding together and you can sort of have some fun within that. But it's too complex to just sort of riff that whole thing because you are skipping timelines. That would be very hard to say, I'll just see what happens next. It's like, oh my God.
And look, there are brilliant books that are written that way. But what those thriller writers will tell you, and I know because many of them are my friends and it's a big community and everybody shares everything, is that people who write that way frequently almost always have to go back and say, okay, wait, what did I do here? And they have to go back and do many revisions because where they've ended up is not where they started, and the emphasis on certain clues that don't become important, they have to take out. So that it's a different process, and that's a great process. For me, it doesn't work. I much prefer to have my structure. I have such anxiety when I look at the page and I don't know what has to happen.
Yeah.
So, but every writer is different.
How about the timing? So I guess your litigation had wrapped. So you had 10 open weeks, or were you also, so would you get up at 5 a.m. and are you working all day long?
Yeah. Well, I would take my kids to school, drive them to school, get home, by 8:15 and then right to work. And I would write until 2:00. I mean, I'd take breaks, but I would write until it was time to pick them up. Usually one of them would be out by 2:30, 3:00. And then there was always sports and other things going on. So I only wrote while they were at school. And on the weekends, if they were with their dad, I would write all weekend. I would write sometimes, 10 hours that day. I would take breaks. That's unsustainable for a long period of time. And I don't like to write that way. For me, 4 to 6 hours of really quality writing time is a really good day. Sometimes I set page limits and I'm just not allowed to stop until I get a certain number of words or pages down, chapters sometimes. So but I definitely, there's no option. This is what I do, and I have to do it first thing when I.
And then are you editing as you go, or do you sort of rush to the finish line and then go back?
I always read the chapter that I wrote before. And that's how I ease into it, because it's very painful for me. I think for most writers to sit down, settle your brain and look at a blank page and come up with stuff. It's actually, for me, I find it very hard. So I will always settle in by looking at the chapter before and sort of saying to my brain, you're not really working, you're just reading, just perusing what you've done before. And I'll always make changes to it and try to make it better, tighter, whatever. And by then I'm usually in gear.
Yeah, then you're in the flow.
Then you're in the flow. And then I can, get going on the next chapter.
Have you, since this book came out, so you had 2, I think, that you bottom drawered prior to this.
Yeah.
Has there been anything since that you're like, this one's not working, I can't quite, for whatever reason, get it there, so I'm just going to put it aside and start something else?
There were, no. The answer, I guess, is no. There was one book that got set aside, and then I resuscitated it and changed it. And that was actually, I don't know if this is the one your friend listened to on Audible that came out in May, called Mad Love. And that book had been a novel, very different. It had the same setup and the same ending, but the middle was completely different. And after when I started working with Audible I have sort of 2 tracks. I write novels, traditional print novels. And now I also write for Audible, and I've started writing these scripted pieces that sound like they're called audio plays, and they sound like old-fashioned radio plays almost. Sound effects, a full cast of characters. So American Girl was the first one I did for them. And that was a novel that...
Do you write in the direction for the sound effects too? Almost like a screenplay? So
now
you're saying, this. So you direct the entire experience.
Yeah. So Mad Love was the first one that was fully scripted. And I was able to be an executive producer on that for the first time.
Very cool.
So I was involved in all of the recording sessions, which was so much fun. I mean, just to be able to...
Do you ever voice a character?
No, my gosh. I actually went down to the Audible studios just to, meet everybody in person who I hadn't met, the director, and to see my producer who was in from LA. And And they're like, well, while you're here, like you should just let's record a few little cameos. And we'll, we had like these characters had one line, or like we had the chief of police had 2 lines. And I had practiced them, I had the script. I mean, I wrote the script and I could hear the character in my head and it was so bad. It was so bad. I think everything got cut except one line that had like 4 words. Yeah. So I am in it, but it's just it is truly a gift to be able to record.
It is an art. People have said, why don't you, sort of do the narration for your books? And I'm like, I think people have that as a career because they're actually very good at it. It's sort of like acting.
Oh my gosh.
Plus it would take hours and hours to do it. I don't think I have the staying power to do it.
It's a profession. And it is a learned profession. And when people are good at it, they're good at it. And when they're not, then they're not. And it makes such a difference to have skilled performers in audiobooks, and especially in the scripted pieces. Yeah. It's really important.
All right, last question on process. How about trusted readers? I know it sounds like your agent is somewhat involved on, how to land this one, but is there a small group of folks that you get feedback from early on?
No, I don't do that.
You to your agent.
Yeah, it's my agent. How
about the boys? I mean, they're now.
God, no. I mean, they really can't read my work. Actually, two of my sons were traveling together this summer, and they listened to Mad Love, and that one they could handle because it's really. The stuff I do for Audible is a lot lighter than my print books, and so they're fun. They're dark. They're psychological thrillers, but they're a little bit easier to digest. There's nothing too dark about them. It's more the sort of like scandal going on in the town and all of that, and so they were able to listen to that and they enjoyed it. But no, my oldest son read All Is Not Forgotten, and he said, Mom, I just don't want to know all those things that are going on inside your head. And I totally get it. Yeah. I totally get it. So,
funny. So the most recent Audible is Mad Love.
Mad Love.
And then you have a novel coming up, Blade. Is that right?
Blade, yes.
When is that?
Blade will be out in early 2026. And before Blade, hopefully there will be another Audible original called The Room Next Door, which is what I just finished. So hopefully 2 projects coming out in the next year. The Room Next Door on audio and Blade. Yeah, Blade will be the next big novel. It'll be a while since my last print novel, which is called What Remains, came out in June of 2023.
What Remains? I think that might be what Sarah...
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure if it was Audible or if it was a book on tape of What Remains.
They've all been on audio, so maybe it was that. Yeah.
I'll double check with her, but I think that's what it was.
Okay.
By the way, is that an Aura ring?
It is.
I'm not wearing mine because it's almost like sometimes I feel like I'm getting inundated with too much information and I start checking it too much. And I'm like, this is becoming a negative. I'm obsessed with seeing what my heart rate is right now. But I have one. I'm just not wearing it right now. But overall, I like it.
Yeah, I got it because I don't know. I feel like I'm at a certain age. I want to start taking note of, what's going on with my body. And
same, unfortunately.
Yeah, because I have not in the past. I mean, I've continued to be an athlete, I think, for most of my life. And I just treat my entire body like it's indestructible. Working, I'll sit at a desk for 10 hours. It's not good for you, or I started weightlifting without a trainer. That wasn't good for me. So now I'm like, and my sleep has been really bad. Yeah. So now I'm like, okay, I want to make sure. I just got it. So I don't know if it's going to drive me crazy.
I'm ditto on all those things, which is why I also got it. My wife has it too. But now I see I wonder how I slept last night. And I look at it and it's sort of like getting a test back in school or something. I'm like, oh, it wasn't very good. So
yeah, it's interesting.
I found I'm doing like 2 or 3 days on and maybe a week off kind of thing. So I'm checking in. If I have it every day, it's too much.
Yeah. I don't know how I feel about it yet. I've only had it working for about a week. And
it's fun to see it.
It is fun.
It actually was pretty accurate because I know, the other night I knew I got up at a certain time. I checked the time. I'm like, I'm going to test this thing. See if it knew I was actually awake. And it was
and it
right.
does. Yeah. It's shocking. Like even when if you're awake for 15 minutes during the night, it knows you're awake. I'm like, how do you know? I'm lying here still. I'm so quiet.
And the other day I was playing tennis and it had a little suggestion thing. I'm like, were you playing tennis? I'm like, Jesus, I was. How did it? It's like a magic ring.
Yeah, it detects the movement, so I guess I could just stand there waving my arm and it would think I was playing
You can
tennis.
fool it. That'll be our next thing is trying to
fool your Oura ring. Yeah.
All right, so on to the lightning round.
Oh my gosh, okay.
Wendy Walker.
Oh gosh, okay. I hope I remember my answers. All right, let's go.
I know I started giving these out in advance recently. I had a guest on who, in the beginning, maybe the first 10, you're probably episode 75 or 80 or something like that. And after about 10, I had a friend call me and he's like, and he was a future guest on the show.
Yeah.
And he said, man, I love everything about the show. The lightning round, I think you should give it to people in advance so just they have a moment. Otherwise, they're going to get to the elevator and think, oh my God, that other story would have been way more funny.
Yes.
So I have, a day or two in advance, I send these out so people can think of their best stories. So your favorite book as a kid? The
Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Nice.
Yeah.
C.S. Lewis just came up in a previous conversation with a guest.
So I'm reading 2 books to endorse. One is called Retreat by Kristen Ritter, the actress, who's actually a novelist as well. And that book comes out in March. And The Last Session by Julia Bartz. I'm not sure when that comes out.
Is Kristen Ritter related to John Ritter?
Oh my gosh.
The actor?
Do not know. Okay. And I feel like I should know that.
What has she been in? I'm trying to.
She was Jessica Jones
in
the Marvel series, and she was in Breaking Bad.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah,
show.
she was Jesse's girlfriend that dies from an overdose.
Okay,
I don't want to do spoilers of Breaking Bad.
Okay. But I know John Ritter from Three's Company has a son who is an actor.
I don't think they're related. Yeah. Although it's possible. All
right. That might be
I've never asked
tangent.
That. Yeah. But. Anyway. And then The Last Session by Julia Bartz, which I'm reading right now. And it's so good. And I have to actually write a blurb for it. And that will be out sometime this year.
Cool.
Yeah.
Best twist ever in a book or film of psychological suspense.
The Sixth Sense.
Oh, yeah.
Hands
such a good one.
Down. The execution of that twist just was so brilliant. The twist itself was brilliant, but the execution was so perfect.
That was a moment. And when that first came out, everyone was talking about it. Like, don't spoil that. That's the ultimate spoiler. If you tell somebody what's going on
Don't tell anyone. Yeah. And when it's been so fun to watch that with my kids. And to see their reaction to it.
We just did that with our kids.
Because it holds up. I mean, some parts, you feel like it's not moving as fast as what we're used to seeing now. But the twist and the execution of it, I think unprecedented.
And then it all falls into play. The penny drops, as they say.
Drops.
Like, oh my gosh, and it all makes sense.
There's that one moment, and you just gasp, and then your brain. It goes through all of the things, and that is the perfect reveal.
Yeah.
When the reader or the viewer goes back and can see all
how
of
everything
was laid out for you, and because of the initial setup, our brains automatically went to a certain assumption about what was going on. And it was such a benign assumption. I don't want to give it away, but then you just hold it the whole time. Mm-hmm. You never question it. And it's so interesting how our minds work. And psychological suspense, actually, the name is really because it plays on the psychology of the reader, not because of any particular psychology that's in the book. You can have a psychological thriller without any, people with psychological ailments or conditions or anything like that. Mm-hmm. It's because they are playing on the psychology of the reader or the viewer.
It's like those films they show where, you're supposed to follow the ball, but then like a bear walks. I don't know if you've ever seen these things. It's like how, and then they show it back. Like, this is exactly what you showed you, but something so obvious you somehow didn't even see it. It's crazy.
Yes, it's the way that when you start constructing a novel in this genre, that's what you're really is your goal. You're trying to think about how you don't want to trick anybody, but you want them to make assumptions. And you want to lead them down a path that will feel right to them, while you're also carving a little path of breadcrumbs to the truth that later they will be able to see and not.
That's the brilliant stuff when you finish it and you don't feel like it was a cheap shot to get to the ending. Like, they just took a shortcut.
I call that the evil twin ending. Like, come on, wait, what?
Yeah.
So.
Oh, that's great. The Sixth Sense, the Bruce Willis in his prime too.
Oh my God. So good.
All right. Least attended book event ever.
Yeah. So there was one person at this book event, and it was at a Barnes & Noble. It was with one of my first 2 books that earlier in my career. And there was, rows of chairs in this little area they'd cleared out. And I had my whole talk ready. This was before I kind of was more seasoned. And they announced on the speaker, everybody, if there's an author in the house is about to give a talk. And I'm standing at this little podium microphone, and there's just nobody sitting there. And all of a sudden this man comes in who I think was there for shelter, honestly. And he just sat down and he actually watched. But then when
so
one
you
person,
gave it to him?
I'm not going to say you're not worth it. You're not worth my 20-minute talk about how I constructed all my background. So I gave a shorter version of it. But then you're just giving the talk. Yeah.
And then you should just buy him a copy at that point.
Exactly. Thank you. Exactly.
It'll cost you money in the end.
Exactly.
Strangest question ever at a book event.
Yeah, so the strangest question was somebody asked me, we were talking about process, where do you like to write, things like that, and somebody asked me what I like to wear. And it was a woman, and
while you're writing?
While I'm writing. What do you wear while you're writing? And it was weird because it's not like that exciting. It's, I'm usually wearing like pajamas.
They're really trying to paint the picture of
but it was interesting, like how much she needed or wanted to picture me writing a book, or maybe if she did all those things that she would be able to get words on a page. I don't know what the motivation was, but yeah.
How did you handle that one? Were you like?
I think I said I'm usually something comfortable.
Yeah, sweatpants.
Sweatpants. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I do. Even on the show, we'll try to get, some people have a favorite desk, or they need to have a view, or they need to have no view, or, what there is a sort of some people can write in a back of an Uber. Other people need to be totally situated with their coffee and whatnot. So
the strangest place I ever wrote was in the back of my minivan. So early on when I was writing those 2 novels that first got published, my kids went to this little preschool up in North Stamford, and it was in the middle of nowhere and 20 minutes from my house. And the school, it was like maybe 2 hours long. It was, early preschool. And I would leave the other ones home. We had an au pair, and I would leave them home, take my son to preschool, and I would write in the back of the minivan. And no matter what season it was, if it was cold, I had blankets. I had, back when laptops had batteries, I had an extra battery for my laptop. Mm-hmm. And I would just sit there, and people remember me sitting in the back of my car, like, had my coffee, and I would write for 2 hours and just get it in.
You're getting just little, $15,000 advances.
Exactly. Back
long ago.
Oh my gosh! Wow. Yeah.
All right. Well, last question for Wendy Walker. One piece of advice for the audience.
Oh my gosh! Just get words on a page. Just get the words on a page. And then, and know the business. I mean, maybe that's the most important thing, because the words you put on the page, if you want to sell them, you kind of need to know the business and understand where you're headed with your words. But once you know what you want to write, just get the words down. You can revise them later. You can tear it up later, but you just have to, words on a page.
That's great. Well, your personal story is so inspiring too. So
I guess I hope so.
No, it really is. It's just amazing. You sort of set your sights on it and you made it happen.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have this career. I am grateful for it. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of luck. Right place at the right time. And I don't take it for granted ever, not ever. So very grateful for it.
Well, Wendy, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was such a pleasure, really.